Hello, welcome to the extras video for the Australia Conservation Conversation. You know the drill by now. This is all the stuff we couldn't fit into the main video, including cats, coal, crocodiles, and sexy science. Enjoy.
All right. Yeah. So one of our big problems in over here at the moment are feral cats.
Mhm.
So just domestic tabby cats like you get at home in England or everywhere in the world, really. They have been roaming wild over here for probably at least a couple of hundred years, more or less since people got here from Europe. They came on the ships as a tool to catch and control rats, and
Yeah.
yeah, but as soon as they're out, and Australia provided them with a productive environment, they were able to survive and reproduce very effectively away from people. And of course, when they live away from people, they don't eat rats anymore. They eat the native
Yeah.
wildlife, and not only do they eat it, but cats have been proven time and again to actually kill for pleasure as well.
Mm.
Well, for pleasure is possibly the wrong word, but for the experience gained in doing so. Particularly young cats, when they're still kind of learning to hunt, they invest a lot of time and energy in prey capture, possibly as a learning, like as a way of upskilling,
Yeah.
and then don't actually eat that prey item. So sometimes a single cat can kill 9 or 10 small mammal-sized animals, like mouse-sized animals,
Mm.
in a single day or night. Usually night over here because they tend to be more nocturnal. But if you look at the total number of cats roaming wild in Australia, and you sort of balance that out over the course of a year, we're looking at many, many millions of animals killed, of which only a small proportion are actually eaten in any one year. And that's actually it's actually causing what people are calling the second wave of mass extinction within this native small mammals in Australia at the
Mm.
moment. And it's also starting to seem like it's having a real bad effect on reptile populations in some areas as well.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm giving this as context to try and say what we are doing well. So that's obviously a really bad thing, but Australia is fairly unique, like I said before, small population density, large land area. But within that large land area, we have a lot of Indigenous people who are spaced out, especially in places like the Northern Territory, Western Australia, more remote places. And those people still live on the land in quite traditional ways in many places. And scientists have actually collaborated with communities on quite a few occasions now where they've set up we call them indigenous ranger programs, and those
Okay.
people that are already living in remote parts of the bushland, already accessing those habitats, they're actually have been provided with a lot of funding, a lot of training, and a lot of equipment to allow them to actually um, manage cats on their their land, which is a really good thing, and I really like that as a kind of conservation initiative,
Yeah.
because the reality is there's only so many sort of science people in any given country or area, and that they can't provide all the manpower for everything all the time. So using local resources in a kind of equal partnership kind of a way has been something that Australia is possibly a world leader on at this stage.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's good. That's good because you don't often hear, praise for the relations between the native Aboriginal people and the government. So if that's a process that's going on, that's a theme that's come out of the other chats as well. Utilization of local knowledge, utilization of local skill sets, all that kind of stuff being a very powerful conservation tool. So that's great.
absolutely.
That's great. So I mean, how about the flip side then? What and this kind of links maybe into another question, which is what do you think Australia could do better? And if obviously you were in charge as the I don't know Secretary of State for Environment or something like that, Prime Minister, what would you have Australia do better?
Hmm. Well, Australia is heavily reliant on export of natural resources
Mm-hmm.
from mining operations, whether that's coal or iron ore or bauxite, or there's a whole host of things that we send to mainly India and China at this
Mm-hmm.
stage. And it's not really sustainable in the long term
No.
because all those things are finite resources. There's only so much of them, and it's we can't keep doing that forever. So what I would like to see that will benefit the nation, not just in terms of conservation, but on the whole in terms of sustainability, would be a portion of the income from those products put back into innovation or development of our, I guess, renewable energy grid.
Yeah.
What that will do is it will really help to like particularly less well off areas. It would really help to get that initial startup for things like solar, or which obviously over here we have so much sun that
Yeah.
solar is a very feasible thing. Um, and yeah, that in turn would really start slowing down our emissions, which is something every country needs to look towards doing, because I think ultimately, climate change is going to be one of the really big threats for Australian wildlife, particularly. We're a nation where most species are already living on the sort of very cusp of the possibility that their physiologies can cope with. So we
Yeah.
talked about those relict monsoon vine
Yeah.
thickets example, but there's also lots of animals out here that survive extreme heat and drought, and like you increase that by one degree, or you take away that one drop of water, then those things can have very real physiological effects on those animals and
Yeah.
can push them out of areas. So yeah, long term, I'd like that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see
Yeah.
more money from natural resource, particularly coal, invested directly into green energies, and
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, and then a slow transition away from those particularly fossil fuels. That would probably be my single biggest thing I'd like
Yeah.
to see in the near term.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And again, that's a theme we've heard coming out of some of the conversations in Madagascar and in Canada, is that energy, certainly with Madagascar, the same thing about lots and lots of sun. Why aren't we using more solar? Absolutely right. And I mean, and just because I've been privy to either been there for or heard you talk about some of your amazing stories about how you capture some of these photos. Um, could you, for the benefit of the people watching, share some of your perhaps most extreme or most risky um, photography shoots, or some particularly memorable photographs that you've taken and things like that? Because I remember things like you putting hats over snakes to get the camera nice and
Yeah,
close, and then whipping the hat off before the thing bites you, all that kind of stuff. Anything like that
well,
that you can share?
yeah, of course. We can start with one of those stories from Ecuador. Well, I think it was with um, the student group before your group arrived in
Right.
Ecuador. We were at the Nenkapari camp,
Yeah.
the one in the Amazon basin. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
had a small little long drop toilet that was in a hut in the middle of the camp.
Ah,
And
yes, the snake toilet. I remember it well.
yes, the snake toilet. So
Yes.
the very first day, someone went in there and immediately said there was a snake. And I had my suspicions that it would probably be something less pleasant than most people would have liked. So I went to the bathroom with my snake hook, and sure enough, it was a small fer-de-lance.
Hmm.
So I put him in a bag, and I did show the students so that they all knew what this snake was, and that they mustn't go anywhere near it really, because they can be fairly defensive if they feel cornered. And yeah, me and Mika, or Dr. Peck, took the snake for a little walk up the forest trail, a couple of kilometers away from camp, and we did exactly what you said. Wanted to document it, so I put my camera on a tripod with a shutter release cable, so I didn't have to put my hands anywhere near where the snake's strike range was, and
Yeah.
yeah, calmed the snake down by using my kind of bush hat, which is a typical, I think, Indiana Jones type thing, hat over the top. And after leaving him in the dark for a few seconds, he was calm enough to take the hat off and use that shutter release cable from a distance to get that image. And that's a fairly common practice for field herpetologists when if they want to catch a photograph of a venomous snake within the habitat.
Yeah.
Um, and I used to do that, employ that method a lot, but nowadays I actually go to even greater lengths and possibly risks as well, in that I only ever capture animals actually naturally now. I know I a few years ago decided that I there's enough people out there in the world taking images for field guides that I didn't really need that sort of photo in my portfolio. I was more after natural behaviors, natural
Yeah.
scenes without disturbance. So when I photograph venomous snakes now, I do it in a manner so that they're completely unmanipulated, unrestrained, and that often involves very slowly kind of crawling up to them on my belly to still get my camera very close to them. And I find that sometimes the easiest way to do that is to observe them for long periods of time and wait until they're feeding, because when they're feeding, they can't bite you. So I'll share
Smart.
some photographs with you. I recently found a fantastic natural phenomenon where hundreds of speckled brown snakes, which are highly venomous, had congregated around a shrinking waterhole. And the reason was, as the waterhole was drying up, it was stimulating the tadpoles within the pond to actually metamorphosize into small froglets. And these snakes were just going around eating froglets one after the other. And often when I was laying there on the ground, face to face with one of these snakes, photographing it swallowing a frog, I would have to actually tuck and roll out of the way of another snake that was then
No.
coming into the peripheral of my vision kind of thing. And they weren't interested in me in the slightest. They were just interested in feeding. It was a feeding frenzy. But, being that they're so venomous and I was in a remote place, I did have to be very careful not to allow myself to become bitten. I'll
Brilliant.
share one more good story. So
Yeah.
my main photography these days is freshwater, underwater, and people always straight away jump to the conclusion that I must be swimming with saltwater crocodiles because there are saltwater crocodiles all over northern Australia, and it's true there are. I go to great lengths to avoid getting in the water anywhere near one because obviously that's not good for your longevity. You get eaten very quickly. They are very active hunters of people if they're given an opportunity. So my wife and I spend a lot of time walking along creek lines and making sure there aren't any saltwater crocodiles. And we use geographical features to help us avoid them. So, for example, in a small creek, we might find a nice pool that's got two sets of cascades at either end, and where there's no big overhanging banks. And we'll go and watch the water during the day, and then we'll come back at night and do eye shine tests, things like that.
Yeah.
And we have a few other methods as well, but eventually, if we satisfy ourselves that it's a safe location, that there aren't any saltwater crocodiles in there, I'll go in the water and she'll keep a watch out from the bank, and we'll be very, it'll be a very adrenaline fueled adventure for the first little while.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's work. We've been doing this for 3 years now. And we haven't come across any salties in the water.
Right.
But we do often see freshwater crocodiles, which so there are two species of crocodiles up here. There's a saltwater, which is the large, aggressive, occasional man-eater, and then there's this freshwater crocodile, which grows to a length of around about 3 meters. Still big, but they have a very narrow snout, which is typically designed more for catching fish and small turtles, things like that.
Yeah.
They don't typically try and eat large mammals, although they do bite people if you annoy them enough. And typically, though, they're quite reclusive. Anyway, the first time I ever encountered an adult was quite an experience. So I had been following a large northern snapping turtle through the water.
Yeah.
I was swimming on the surface. It was below me, and I saw it go down maybe about 5 meters depth into a kind of rocky cavern along a creek bank. And I had a light on my camera. It's quite dark down there, but as it went in, I saw another big turtle come out, and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. So of course I swam down there to go and see this and try and take a photo. And as I went down, I saw something bigger move in the cavern and thought to myself, oh God, this is it. Game over, heart pounding.
Yeah.
And out floated this quite large crocodile. And it was a freshwater crocodile, not a salty, but it was the first time I'd seen a large adult in the water close up. And I wasn't entirely sure how it was going to react to my presence, but it floated up and maybe to about 5 feet in front of me in the water, and it was just neutrally buoyant, just floating, and it just looked at me, and then it very, very slowly sort of put its head down and swam underneath me back down towards the bottom of the creek, and completely just decided to ignore me being there, decided that I wasn't a threat, and that was it. So that was a very gut-wrenching experience, but it was I got some good turtle pictures.
Yeah. Positives.
And since then, I've actually managed to take a lot of photographs of freshwater crocodiles in the water as well. So,
Great. Well, I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. It's typical kind of stories that I remember from you, and what makes your photography so interesting to someone with not that much of an artistic side as me. Right. So I guess we come to the last question, which is obviously, you're a teacher in Australia, I'm a teacher in the UK. This is coming to A-level students who are going to go off hopefully in the world and maybe do some biology. That's the idea. Is there anything that you would say to them from your experience that they can be mindful of as they go off to university or off into jobs in terms of conservation?
Okay. Well, being that this has been a very environmental themed conversation, um, yes, if you're thinking about studying something environmental at university, and you're looking at that as a career option, it's a very good idea to have to specialize, I suppose, is what I'm going to say. If you go in and you do a zoology degree, or you do an ecology degree, or anything that's kind of relatively broad, you're going to struggle to find employment after university, and you may need to do an undergrad and then a master's or a PhD. To be honest, if you want to be competitive
Mm.
in terms of getting a job. And yeah, the more specialist you go, the easier it will become. But um, stay away from the kind of sexy science subjects like sea turtles and coral. There are far too many people that study those things, and there are no jobs available unless you are willing to work for free for many years as an intern or volunteer before you gain meaningful employment. So
Hmm.
if you have a good support base at home and they're willing to support you whilst you're doing that, then by all means. But otherwise, yeah, wouldn't do that. Um, yeah, and I guess one more piece of advice: a lot of students that I've known over the years have ended up doing a gap year after school before they go to university. I know that's a very popular thing, and hopefully it will be an option when you guys finish school with with the current COVID
Yeah.
situation. But um, I would recommend, if at all possible, save it for after you go to university, if that's what you're going to do,
Okay.
because when you get to 21 or 22 years old, you've just got that many more life experiences of living away from home. You're that much more confident that you will have a much better time with it than if you do it straight out of school, when possibly you won't, possibly you'll be a little bit more limited in terms of what you feel confident doing and where you feel confident going.
If they're eating, they can't bite you. I'm sure I've had classes like that. Next up, Indonesia. See you then.